Hello there, people. Let's do an episode of the podcast. Choo, 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 choo. Hello, and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for listening slash watching if you decide to watch the video on YouTube. Um, anyway, I have some big news. Oh, I'm Hollis. I'm your host, by the way, if you are new to my podcast. And I'm a fantasy author. And huge news just this morning, Tear in the World, which is the third book in my Raashan series, got published. It is on paperback. It was on Kindle already a couple of days ago, but now the paperback is also out on Amazon and everything. Just, I'm so excited. I'm really, really thrilled with how the trilogy rounded out. I love the stories. I love how the characters came through. And if you know about writers and how we work, her characters constantly surprise us. So, actually not what I myself was expecting, but I like how it came out and it all came together. And more books in the Raashan series will be coming in 2026. You have a trilogy now, so you can give me a year to get moving on the other ones. So, yeah, I'm just so excited. I have a trilogy. I have a trilogy. Oh, and I will be at Conjuration November 15 through 17, and that is in Duluth, Georgia. For those of you who don't know, I'm on 11 panels in Conjuration. I'm really excited. I mean, I'm gonna be kinda tired, but I'll be really excited, and they were kind enough to schedule most of my panels for evenings, so I won't have to take a lot of time away from the dealer's room because I will also have an author table that I'm sharing with my friend Alara Dunn, who is a YA magical realism fantasy author, and, she and I have been friends for quite a while, and we're both writers, so we often share a table and keep each other company and all that great stuff when we do cons. And yeah, so if you're coming to Conjuration, look for me on the schedule. I'm in 11 panels, so chances are you can catch me in a panel. And I'm sure I'll be doing something you like or something you're interested in. And then I'll be in the vendors hall. So yeah, and you can get the whole trilogy now, all 3 books. I, of course, will have some good pricing specials for you. I'm not exactly sure what that's gonna be yet, but I'm really excited about it. So so yay! And diving into what we're going to be talking about for this particular episode. So, for those of you who have read my series already, The World of Rashawn, you have basically 3 dominant humanoid races. You have elves, you have humans, and you have demons. And demons in the world of Rashawn are just another race of humanoids. They are not evil, and I just, liked a lot of the physical features that we associate with demons, like horns and, sort of tails and things like that, that I wanted to use for that. So I just thought I'm just gonna call them demons because that's but on the world of Rashawn, they're just another group of people with different skill sets. But if you read the books, you know that even though humans are, of course, a part of the world, they are not my main characters. My main characters are elves. They really are. I have a couple of humans sprinkled in a little bit, but really we focus on the elves in the world of Rashawn because that's just what I wanted to focus on as the author. I found it more fun for me to write the elves. So I wanted to talk about the different cultures of elves that we have on the world of Rashawn. And if you've read the books already, you're already aware of the tribal elves and the city elves. But there are a couple other races. Actually, if you have read, well, Terror in the World just came out this morning, but when you read Terror in the World, you will become aware of another group of nomadic wandering elves, and then there's a whole other group of elves that I haven't mentioned in the books at all yet. But they're coming. Yay! So let's dig into it. Let's talk about the different cultures, peoples of elves on Rashan, and what, how they all kind of live and intermix, if you will. So let's just start in order of appearance. So, To Save a World, first book in the series, we open up on Ethne, who is a tribal elf. She is a member of the Arani tribe. They mostly populate, if you look at a map of Rashan, which, I've got on like my website and stuff anyway. And if you have my books, you have a map inside the books because I do that. But the Irani elves, the tribal elves, pretty much they populate the northern continent in and on Rashan, and they're not like a huge gigantic population, and their homeland is really just focused on that northern continent area. But yeah, Ethne and Darien are members of tribal elves. And the Irani tribe, I have not named other tribes, but in later books I'll figure out some names. Tribal elves in general, some distinguishing features. They all have spirit guide tattoos. So when a tribal elf from any of the tribes, they have unifying factors, of course. I think of the tribes as like the clans of Scotland, if you will. So think of them in that kind of like they all do a lot of the same stuff, but they have some different differentiations and different names, but like everyone has a tartan. And in the tribal elves, like everybody gets spirit guide tattoos. And how they might the artwork of those tattoos might differ and things, but the meaning of those tattoos is the same. And they uh when they come of age, essentially get into come to adulthood, if you will, you finished puberty, good job, then you go and you get the elders, you have like a special ceremony, and the elders kind of meditate on it, and they see what your spirit guide or spirit animal is, because they're animals. And for example, Darien McCallow, because again, it's very strongly based on the ancient Picts or Celts, the ancient Britain people, the tribes that would have inhabited there. Their culture, a lot of their cultural stuff is loosely based on them, and I even imagine them to have Scottish accents, quite frankly. So you know, think of them with that sort of coloring, that kind of and that kind of culture. Uh so except they're much more patriarchal than the actual ancient Picts. Like they which was, the men were but the women are allowed to do less in the Irani tribes, in the tribal elves. They're a little bit more um yeah, well, downtrodden, in my personal opinion, but, that's just me. I'm getting off track. The spirit guide tattoos, they get them, like, the character Darien has a horse on his back. Ethne has a phoenix all the way down her left side, which magical creatures aren't usually chosen. She's very unique in that way, which is, she's special, main character energy. So, yeah, but and, like, I don't know if I ever mentioned in the book, but Ethne has an older sister, Rosalind. Rosalind has a rabbit, as her spirit guide tattoo, and I imagine that, in the middle of her back and all that sort of thing. So that is what happens. The Irani elves also, they love tattoos when they get married. They don't wear rings, like like we do in our world, or in our human culture so much. But what we do, or what they do, is they have the like branded logo of their spouse's family name tattooed on the back of their left hand. And so, for example, Ethne, I gave her the last name Alfrey, so Ethne Alfrey is her full name. She would have Darien McCallow, the McCallow symbol tattooed on the back of her hand. However, Darian, to show that he's married to an Alfrey, has the Alfrey symbol tattooed on the back of his hand. And only married people have those tattoos, and you have the name of your partner. The family name of the partner, not you don't both just have you don't both have one partner's name. It just shows like I now, I have intertwined with this person. And which I thought was kind of romantic. And so that is how, it's really easy to tell as long as nobody's wearing gloves whether or not somebody's married in the tribal elf culture. They are tend to be a little more modest, as far as dress is concerned and things like that. You don't really, and it's cold there anyway, but show you don't show a lot at all. Yeah, you just don't. It's a more modest culture for men and women. They don't, you don't go shirtless if you're a man and that sort of thing. It's just kind of they're a more modest culture. They're rough. They live again like you would imagine. Think of the ancient Picts or the Celts of the British Isles. They live very similar to that. They don't build big cities. They build villages. They do a lot of agriculture. They do a lot of sheep herding, that kind of thing. And they prefer it that way. They're not city folk. They don't do that. But I really like that. Their physical features. So all elves, just to give you a rundown, like elves, like across the board, they're all taller than humans. So, for example, I think the average height for a human male in our modern world is around 5'10". Average height for an elven male would be around 6'2" to 6'3". So they are taller, being 6'5", 6'6", for an elven male, pretty normal. By the same token, I think human female average height is around 5'5", 5'6". Elven female's average height is gonna be 5'8" to 5'10". And, you know, uh, so all the Irani are like that too because they are elves. However, the Irani, all the elves have very different coloring. All the different, cultures of elves have very different coloring. So the tribal elves are, again, we're thinking ancient Britons. They're characterized, they have paler skin. I have notes if you see me looking, if you're watching the video. um they have paler skin. They usually, tend to have light hair and eyes. That's not across the board everyone, but they're lighter in coloring and all that other stuff. And that's where they are. But yeah, and they live off the land. They're more rugged. Elven peoples. The next culture we meet, also in To Save a World, are the city elves. Now, city elves are more widespread. You have a bunch of different cities of elves, but their culture is not terribly different. You know, think about okay, so trying to figure out a nice analogy for you here. So you have okay, think of New York City. We've got New York City, right? It's hustle and bustle. Think about general people who live in New York. And then think about another major city like Tokyo. You have it's a very different culture, but when you look at it just from people milling, it's the hustle and bustle is still there. It's still very metropolitan. The people are on their way, they're into the business, and they have a lot of practices that are actually kind of similar just because they live in this urban metropolitan kind of life, and city elves are very much like that. So the different cities are going to each have a different feel to them and everything else, but the people are urban metropolitan. They don't everything is kind of it's a city. It's think of metropolis kind of stuff. It's but fantasy metropolis. But tightly, close together buildings, city streets, walled cities, all of that, in general. So you have some major cities of elves on the continent of Croatia, which is the largest continent in the world of Rashan. The biggest elf city is called Lupia. The characters do go there, and to save a world, obviously get into trouble, but, read my book to figure out how and why. But, yeah, Lupia and the Lupian elves tend to be, a little more light-haired, yeah, they tend to kind of have lighter coloring, and they tend to revere nature a little more closely than some of the other elven the city-dwelling elves do. Their buildings are intertwined with trees a lot of the time and that kind of thing, which is cool in my mind. And they're built and they're one of the and I know I'm, like, jumping, but one of the unifying factors among city elves in my mind is that they all they like shiny things. They so, they in Lupia, I mean, I could open it up to the page, and I should have probably done that, but I described you have the beautiful, like, trees, like, the buildings and the trees coexisting, built into things, like built around nature and accommodating nature, but the buildings themselves are like polished quartz and marble, and they glisten in the sunlight against the gorgeous leaves and bark. And, in my mind, it's like super pretty, but really pretty city. And then, for example, Aram, who, main character, one of the Rashan series, one of the big main characters, he is from the elven city of Amara, which is on a totally different continent, the most northern continent, which I haven't named on the map, but Amara is labeled on the map. And that city, when I do describe it in a flashback that Aram has, in To Save a World, a lot of the city and Irani stuff gets described in To Save a World, but that is I described the city is like made of mirrored glass and shining quartz. And at nighttime, especially when the moon is full, the light of the moon reflects off of all of the buildings. And it's just like this gorgeous, luminous silver light. And all of the city elves, in my personal assessment, and I'm the creator and author, so, that's how it is. They all build these, like, literally shining cities. They use quartz, they use glass, they use reflective, shining materials to build their cities, and they are just like, they reflect the starlight, they reflect the sunlight. It's really shiny. And they like that a lot. Jeeve, he's also another one of our main characters. He is from Lupia, and Jeeve has white blonde hair and, like, sage green eyes, and he's a tan skin, but he's definitely physically very much when you would think of a Lupian elf, Jeeva's a stereotypical looking guy. And, Aram is also very stereotypical looking for an elf from Amara. Now, Aram, honestly, if I were to say who he looks like physically, I have a celebrity immediately in mind, Enrique Iglesias. He, like, Aram is a pretty boy, handsome guy. He has, tousled black hair, he has brown eyes with thick eyelashes, he has tanned skin, and s the elves from Amara and the other city elves from the city of Gwyn on the southern continent, which is where another main character, Jocelyn, was raised, they are more Latin. Which is why if I were to liken how Aram think Latin peoples, think South America, think Spain, think Italy, think that. If you wanna think maybe a little Persian too, but they're dark-haired, beautiful brown eyes, thick eyelashes, golden skin or cinnamon skin, and, they're really I personally think that that's very attractive. And that's what most city elves look like. Lupian elves are a little different. They're kind of the only city elf race or culture that is light-haired and eyed as a mark of what they look like. But the other city elves and the two other major elven cities that we talk about or that I have on the map right now are they're all across the world, so they're on 3 continents, and only one of them kinda the having light eyes and hair is a little it's not unheard of, but it would be more rare. Think of the other elves as being Latin or Persian looking, so Aram is very stereotypical in his appearance as well for his people of Amara. And yeah, again, just think metropolitan. They tend to they live that city life. They're probably not gonna do so well if you had to put them out in the countryside, and, they would get a lot of their livelihood, a lot of their food and things. They have gardens and whatnot, but they would trade a lot with, the cultures outside of their city walls to get more of the produce and that sort of thing, and they provide more, like, manufactured goods manufactured goods and services of that nature because that is where they come from. They come from a metropolis kind of culture, an urban culture, one that makes, items and creates things, more what we would, think of industrial in a lot of ways, but also and they love shiny stuff. They love shiny shit. And in Tear in the World, we first hear about well, actually, we do technically hear a little story about them in To Save a World, but I'll get there. But we really first hear about an elven culture that are the Wanderers, and I call them the Randir. Randir, Randir. I got that word as one of the original root words for the word wanderers or wanderer because I love my dictionary of word origins, and when I want to name things or people or places, I often consult my dictionary of word origins, and I like etymology quite a lot. And Randir is long unused, but was one of the root words, one of what was used hundreds or thousands of years ago for wanderer, which is what they are. They are very strongly based, culturally speaking, on the Romani people. And they live in caravans. They don't really have a homeland. The Romani, here on Earth, they do, but they also they travel. That's what they do. They have the care. So think of that. We know that they came from certain areas, but they travel, and that's what the Randir do. And the Randir are they don't really have a homeland because of that, and that's okay with them. They don't mind because being together, being with each other is their home, and they are yeah, very much based on the Romani. You think of the beautiful dances, you think of all the colors and the bells and all of that, and that is the Randir elves and the divination and everything. All of those beautiful, fantastical things you might think associated with Romani peoples. Um, yeah, that's the Randir. And they are known more for their divination and skills of intuition and being able to see. They, of course, have those beautiful sultry dances that are lively, known as wonderful entertainers, and that's how many of them make livings. They wander around, They, sing songs, they entertain, they're the most artistic elves probably if you were to think of them as a personality like that, and, they they're they're cool. In my head, I'm really excited, and the first book in the Raashan Histories trilogy, which is the next book coming in 2026, we're going to talk about what the world of Rashan was like before the death of the gods, before the heavenly wars, and yeah, what happened, and possibly what led up to it a little bit. But we do meet someone in Terran the World who is connected to that. Kristen Quailvan, who is a very, very, very old seer who helps Aram out in Terran the World, but she is a Randir elven woman. And the first book in the Histories trilogy harkens back to her younger days when she was a very young Randir woman and a dancer by trade before she became a very famous seer and very gifted. And you get to find out how Kristen does that, which I like, I like to intermingle, I like to leave a few hints and whatever in my books and let it go by, and keep in mind, elves, I should have mentioned this at the top, elves live for about 700 years. They would reach maturity, like for the Irani, the coming of age would take place between 95 and 100 years of age. And so that's a teenager, essentially. And then they age like 4 or 5 times more slowly than we humans do. So they, for example, Ethne, in To Save a World, I think she's 123 years old, but that would be akin to someone who is maybe 21, 22 in human years. But she's been around, she's been alive for 123, but she's still quite a young elf. And, Darian, I think I made him 130, which again, elves age much more slowly, so Darian's like 27, 28. That's what he would look that would be his maturity level, that's where, he would look like to us. And so Kristen, being a very old seer, when a Ram encounters her, she's actually over 700 years old. She is beyond the average lifespan. She's very, very old. Um, but we go back over 600 years in the past, a couple hundred years prior to the Heavenly Wars, the death of the gods, all of that, to see what happened with her back then, and that will be called The Key, and that is coming in spring of 26. I've already started writing it, so really excited to share that with you, but you really get a much closer look at the Randir culture. The other thing that the Randir that I did mention is, in To Save a World, we have this lovely little side story that's kind of romantic. We talk about a myth and legend from the world of Rashan, which is the story of Amara. And I know I gave Aram's home city that same name. Total honesty, I really like that name, and I accidentally used it twice. So, but I was like, forget it, we're keeping it. We can just say that she's such a famous, popular, legend, ancient legend we we use it. But the story of Amara is, over 1,000 years ago on the world of Rashan, long, many, 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 many moons ago. On Rashan, there was a demigod that fell in love with an elven maiden. and the elven maiden's name was Amara. But her people were nomadic and moved constantly, and the demigod could not always find her because that demigod obviously they moved around too and went up into the heavens. They did their thing. They're a god, they're not. And so the gem of Amara was gifted to this maiden, and so that they could always find each other. It would zero in on the divine energy, and the demigod would be able to zero in on the power of the gem so that no matter where the other was in the whole world, they could come together and find each other. And that's the story of the Gem of Amara. But Amara, from that sweet little romantic legend, is a reindeer elf. Her people are nomadic. That's that's what it is. And so yeah. So that was something that was actually before I named and everything, but I always knew I wanted to have like a wandering nomadic elven culture, and that was based very strongly on the very romanticized version of the Romani people that we have here on Earth. Physical characteristics. They are known for having more like very dark hair and light eyes with pale skin. So, to give you an idea, the character of Kristen, she has, raven, like very, very dark black, just black hair, bright green eyes, and her skin is pale. And that's what she looks like. And that's more their coloring. That's, yeah, that's, that's just it. Also, side note, a lot of these are based on D&D games that I've played. Kristen was the very, very first character I ever created when I was 11 years old. I gave her that name, Kristen Quailvan, and she developed more over the years. But yeah, very first character I ever created. And the key, like to save a world, is fully based on a role playing campaign that I played with my best friend years ago. Years ago. And of course, I'm going to be incorporating a lot of the characters and the whole plot of what I came up with when we played. I love it. I love that I get to write Kristen and immortalize her for myself in that way. And she was my original, like the very first D&D character I ever created ever when I first learned about role playing D&D. And so it's special to me. And that's what Kristen looks like. So when I was thinking, okay, what characterizes the Randir elves? And I figured, well, I think Kristen would just be very standard for her people. I think that she would be a stereotypical appearance for what her people look like, which just like Russian women tend to have, well, Russian people in general are also thought to be characterized in this way: dark hair, light eyes, pale skin. That's also something. So I guess you could say that they have that Russian appeal. The last ones that we're going to talk about, which I'm very excited about them. I love them. And yes, guess what? Inspired fully by other characters of mine from years past Dungeons and Dragons role-playing campaigns. So the last culture of elves on the world of Raashan, they are, and I'm probably going to change my mind how to pronounce this over and over, Droiz. Drouiz. Droiz elves. They populate the subcontinent of Cern. And Cern, if you look at that, it's not labeled on the maps yet. But so you have Croatia, which that's on the left side of the map if you're looking at it, and it's the largest continent. It's where Lupia is, it's where the city of Duomo is, and all of that. There's a smaller subcontinent just above it, and that is the homeland of the Droiz elves. And the Droiz elves, Droiz, I love my etymology. I went back to those word origins. One of the original root words for druid. They're druids. Straight up druids. I base some of their very loosely base some of their cultural aspects and things like that on Native Americans. Again, that's very, very loose, just some practices, and a lot of it is the relationship with the earth itself. But it's just some pieces taken from that and not fully based on Native Americans, just a few of the pieces taken from it. They are all elves of the Druids are like they're druids, they are highly connected to the earth. So much so that they have their own special relationship that breeds a sort of magic. But it's you could call it magic. That sounds like the easiest way to describe it. But what it is they just have such a deep relationship with the world itself and the plants and animals that inhabit it that they have learned the language of the trees and the animals and everything, and they have found a way to communicate on a higher level, which again would seem like magic, but I look at it more as they have achieved this higher consciousness just eons ago, and that's something that's passed down, and they all know how to speak the language of the trees to the point where the Druid elves actually live inside living redwoods and things like that. It's just they but the trees are still alive because they revere the earth. They do not want to kill anything. So they learned to speak the language of the trees and the plants and everything else to to allow the trees to let them live inside. So they live in the forest and they make their homes inside these trees that have agreed to grow around and allow space inside for them. And it's just like in my I love it. I love it because in my head it's just like classic fairies and, everything. Just like the most fantastical elves there are. And and in my head I'm like, "Ah, I'd love to see this like on a screen someday." Because I mean, who doesn't want to see the trees and the elves and everything? They are getting back to their culture. They all have very like darker skin. That's think Native American in that kind of appearance. They generally have dark eyes but lighter and darker skin, very, very tan. And they also have more the lighter hair. But we see in Rashawn, like the character Jocelyn, for example, does have purple hair, which is a little unusual. It's not unheard of, but especially for a city elf, it's a little, where do these various colors of hair come from? They come from the Droaz elves. The Droz elves, pale green, like a beautiful seafoam green, which is one of my favorite colors, like a seafoam or a mint, is one of the most common hair colors among the Droz elves. Purple is a very common hair color. They have, again, dark eyes, brown eyes, and very dark, and tanned skin. But they have like and it just makes them more magical. But their hair is green, their hair is purple, maybe blue. Of course, some of them might have brown or blonde or red, but most commonly, the Droz elves have pale green or purple hair, which I think is really cool and very beautiful and fun to draw. And they also have celestial tattoos. So, again, another character of mine from the long, long ago role-playing days. I named her Starflower. Starflower will be the focus of book 3 in the Histories trilogy. And that's probably gonna show up in, like, 2029 or 2028. We'll see how fast I get these written. But I've already got her. But Starflower, she has, dark eyes, dark skin, pale, minty seafoam green hair, and she has, I'd say, celestial tattoos. So the Droz elves, they are not only very connected to the earth, but they're also very connected to the celestial plane. And they pay a lot of attention to the moon and all of that kind of things, and the stars, and it's very, and they honor it. And Starflower, which is, they're big hippies. They're druids, okay? And also all Droz elves are vegan. They revere the animals too much. They refuse to do them any harm. They coexist with them, and they often have familiars that like Starflower actually, well, okay, she had a velociraptor named Bam Bam. I can't technically have velociraptors on Rashawn, but yes, I can, and I can just make it a velociraptor and call it something else. So look forward to that. But in the role-playing game in the Pathfinder system, they actually do have dinosaurs, and so I was allowed by the rules of that game. And Starflower was a powerful druid. They're vegan. They do not eat any animal product. They live off of the land, and yeah, think of a very fantastical, whimsical hippie commune, and you've got the Druid elves. They that's them. Another character of mine, which her name is Amari, and she's also from another game, and I will be getting into her story later because that was a really good game. That was such a good game. And that is going to tie in with some other stuff in future trilogies. And also, if you were listening to my podcast around November, December of last year, that is about the time that I was reading the series of short stories that I wrote originally for um, the power therapy with Dr. Vorster and all of that. And Amari, who is my D&D character, I started doing that, and I call her Faye in those short stories. But I was already beginning the adventure and just kind of retelling within those short stories the adventure, the D&D adventure. And Amari, who also has pale green hair, dark eyes, dark skin, again, that is your most common coloring. Uh, Amari does not have any celestial tattoos. Starflower has them on her face. She has a crescent moon and stars down one side of her face. So not all of them do that, but and maybe I'll give Amari a celestial tattoo at some point, but we'll find out later. But if you saw those short stories, I'm gonna tweak them a little bit, but I am going to write down Amari's tale, and I'll have to figure out what time period that fits in. But that's after the death of the gods. Actually, I already have some things figured out, but that's kind of it. Those are the elves, but I love the druids. They're so, it's fantasy. They're so fantasy. They live inside living forests and trees, and they talk to the plants and the animals, and they have these kind of just like they have green and purple hair and very one with nature. And most of them do stay on the continent of CERN. They aren't. So, for example, like the tribal elves, most of them stay on the northern continent. Most tribal elves, like many tribal peoples on our world, they're connected with that land itself is very important to them, and important culturally to them. So you don't see many tribal elves traveling around or living outside of their homeland. Same is true for the Droas elves. They really don't, their homeland, that is what they're really connected to. And on that subcontinent continent of CERN, just above Croatia. And so they they really don't travel much. It's not the most ridiculous thing to see a Druez or a tribal elf out in the world at some point, but it's very rare. You're much more likely to see a city elf traveling around. You're much more likely, of course, you're going to see the reindeer traveling around. But those two, the city elves are much more like how we live our lives, or they have a home, and most of them just kind of live and work and do things in their cities. But for them to travel, pretty normal, very very normal, not unheard of, totally fine. And of course, the reindeer, their home is the open road. They travel in their caravans, and their home is where their family is. So they do that. And but the tribal and the Drowiz elves are much more connected to their homelands, and they don't travel around so much. So it's a little unusual to see them out and about. And yeah, I know this is a little rambly, but as I often do. But those are the 5 different elven peoples, elven cultures that live on Rashan. Obviously, there are some different human cultures too, and kingdoms and things like that. But yeah, and also, the elves, like city elves tend to have kings. They tend to do monarchy style rulings. The tribal elves, they have the council of elders and whatnot, but again, they're not a monarchy. They have more of the inherited elder position, that kind of, the people are also voted in. It's more democratic. It's which a lot of traditional tribal cultures can be very democratic and in the way that they do things. The Droiz elves, they have their leaders, but they're more spiritually led. Think more spiritual kind of leadership, that kind of thing. In the Randir elves, it's again, I just kind of lean on the Romani. The head of the family is the head of the family. Whoever is the elder in a particular caravan is the person who's probably looked upon as the one who's most in charge of the caravan, that kind of thing. And but they have they have their own rules, they have their own guidelines, but they have less need for as much governmental structure because they are wanderers. They live by a code and a way of life, but they don't have they don't need to have rules around land and all these other things because they don't stay in one place. They are always on the move. They're always moving. And they'll stop for a while, stay somewhere for a little while, but then they get back in their wagons, and they'll go, and they go everywhere. Everywhere in Rashan on Rashan. And yeah. So I'm gonna stop talking about the elves of Rashan now. If you have any questions or thoughts or whatever, just pop them into the comments. I'd love to answer some questions. I'd love to know if you are interested in any of that. What do you think was the coolest one? Would you want to live in any of these elven cultures? And yeah, that's where I'm gonna leave it off. I'm gonna stop talking about elves right now. So don't forget to read Terror in the World. And if you haven't already, go get the first 2 books, To Save a World and The Queen Witch in the Raashan series. Yay! And and come see me at Conjuration. Oh, I was going to be at the East Tennessee Occult Expo in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, the weekend of November 23rd and 24th. However, the Occult Expo has actually decided to postpone until next year because while their immediate, venue and everything was not really affected by Hurricane Helene, the surrounding area has. So they made a really beautiful decision, I think, to put the proceeds for the con that they were going to do back into the community to help rebuild this year, and then just everyone's memberships, everything. I'll be a guest next year in 2025, last weekend in November. I don't know what the dates are, but the last weekend in November in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, I will be a guest at the East Tennessee Occult Expo in 2025 because 2024 has been, well, delayed until next year because all of those that money and that effort is now going to aid the community that they serve and live in to help recover from Hurricane Helene. And I think that's really wonderful, and I was really, really excited and proud to, be a part of that kind of mindset and con, 'cause I think that's absolutely fantastic. And like I said, they just sent an email out and they said, "Everyone who scheduled, everyone who got memberships, everything, you're all in for 2025. That is just we're just moving it over a year. If for some reason it doesn't work for you, let us know, but it works for me just fine. So I will be there and I will be a guest." And um yeah, but that's where I am going to leave you now. So thanks so much for listening.